about the circumstances surrounding Cold War political assassinations. The theory of an American president being removed from power by a crazed lone assassin who was in turn quickly killed by yet another crazed lone assassin has been rejected by an overwhelmingly large majority. With the recent passage of the JFK Records Act, Congress has ordered that except in certain rare circumstances, contents of all files relating to the assassination must be unsealed. This act unfortunately does not include any other assassinations, even though there are also controversies and doubts in other cases. Robert F. Kennedy was murdered at a time when he was a popular U.S. Senator and a very strong candidate for President of the United States. As with his brother, the murder investigation was flawed and left similar unanswered questions about an extremely important historical occurrence. Did Sirhan have unpunished accomplices? And was he even in a position to have fired the fatal shot? Martin Luther King's assassination occurred at a time of great American social upheaval. He was both an activist for civil rights and an outspoken critic of the Vietnam War. Many documents relating to his death that would undoubtedly add to our understanding of this tragic event are locked away from view. Why have public officials historically been so secretive about these political murders if they were all committed by lone assassins? The Coalition on Political Assassinations, or COPA, is an organization that was formed to work towards the goal of total release of all information relating to these crimes.
I'll be speaking about political assassinations which our government has either attempted or has been involved in plotting. Whether that leads to an investigative lead, as this panel is called, is up to the researchers here.
Is there somebody talking in the back of the room? Please stop. This is your speaker. Listen to him.
In June of 1993, President Clinton went before the American public to announce that the U.S. had launched several missiles against Iraq in the afternoon. We learned later that 8 people had been killed and many more injured. The attack, said the president, was in retaliation for an alleged plot to assassinate former President George Bush, who was about to visit Kuwait. Clinton said that the attack, well, in this case, as some of you may know...
I don't think we can talk until the people in the back of the room quit their conversation.
No one back here is talking. No one's talking. It's noise out in the hallway.
Yeah.
Well, close the door then.
The alleged plot against George Bush, as some of you may know, has as many holes in it as the Warren Commission report. Clinton announced that the attack on Iraq, quote, was essential to send a message to those who engage in state-sponsored terrorism and to affirm the expectation of civilized behavior among nations, unquote. So said the President of the United States, a nation which in the last 50 years has attempted to assassinate 40 foreign leaders, of those that I know of. Some of those are well known. Fidel Castro many times, Salvador Allende of Chile, Patrice Lumumba of the Congo. Some of them may surprise you. Jose Figueres of Costa Rica, a close ally of ours. Charles de Gaulle of France. Nasser of Egypt. Kim Il-sung of North Korea. 3 separate leaders of Panama, the 9 comandantes of Nicaragua, all in one fell swoop. They planned to kill them all. I have copies here of the full list if anyone wants them after we're finished. The Western world was shocked some years ago when Iran condemned author Salman Rushdie to death because of blasphemy. But that's what we have done. We have condemned many of these foreign leaders to death because they did not share in the holy objectives of U.S. foreign policy. What are we to make of all this? Well, in 1975, the committee known as the Church Committee of the Senate issued a report on assassinations, which concluded, quote, "The committee does not believe that the acts of assassination, which it has examined, represent the real American character. They do not reflect the ideals which have given the people of this country and the world hope for a better, fuller, fairer life. We regard the assassination plots as aberrations," unquote. Well, the Church Committee knew of about a dozen CIA assassination plots and called them all aberrations. What would a congressman today, knowing of the 40 on my list, call them? Probably all aberrations, all 40. It reminds me of the debate between the conspiracies theories and the coincidence theories. The people who call all these assassination plots aberrations are saying in effect that it's just a coincidence. There's no pattern to it. We don't really engage in assassination. That is not our character. They're all aberrations. Since the Church Committee report came out in 1975, each American president has felt obliged to disassociate himself from such evil policies. President Ford in 1976 signed a presidential order saying, quote, "No employee of the United States shall engage in or conspire to engage in political assassination," unquote. In 1978, Jimmy Carter issued a very similar order prohibiting assassinations. In 1981, Reagan signed an order with almost the exact same language as Ford had in 1976. But by 1984, when Reagan was so obsessed with fighting the evil empire and the international communist conspiracy all over the world, he canceled the executive order, which, and what he now instituted was called by the press at the time, quote, "a license to kill," unquote. A license to kill anyone deemed a terrorist, which is a pretty loose term, as you all know. 5 months later, Reagan canceled the license to kill because in the interim, we had paid people in Beirut to kill a certain Sheikh Fadlallah who was not to our liking. The attempt to kill the Sheikh with a car bomb took 80 lives. Unfortunately for the U.S. government, the Sheikh was not one of them. A few months later, the license to kill was again reinstated because of a TWA hijacking. Clearly, Reagan was not acting out of principle for or against the assassinations. It was all public relations. And our policy in the field over the years, in all likelihood, has never varied to speak of. When assassination was deemed to be a handy and important tool, it was used, or the plot to assassinate somebody was hatched. Whatever the White House was saying at the time, our policy in the field has not varied very much at all. If you look at the list of assassinations which I have available, you can see there was no period in the 50s or 60s or 70s or 80s and any long period where it was not used. In 1986, we bombed Libya with the intention of killing Muammar Gaddafi. And although we killed 40 people, including Gaddafi's daughter, Gaddafi, like the Sheikh in Beirut, was not amongst the victims. Subsequently, two of Gaddafi's children filed suit in the U.S. to stop Reagan from launching more assassination attempts against their family. The suit alleged that Reagan and other top officials, in ordering the raid, had violated their own executive order, barring assassination of foreign government leaders. These Libyans were thus taking the presidential orders more seriously than the American government had ever taken them. The suit, of course, by the Gaddafi family got nowhere in courts in the U.S. In 1989, George Bush added a twist to this whole question. He issued a memorandum of law that would allow, quote, accidental, unquote, killing if it was a byproduct of illegal action. Quote, a decision by the president to employ overt military force would not constitute assassination if U.S. forces were employed against the combatant forces of another nation, a guerrilla force, or a terrorist or other organization whose actions pose a threat to the security of the United States. In other words, assassination was okay as long as we said, oops. That's, as far as I know, that Bush memorandum of law still is in effect. If you're wondering about JFK, in his short term in office, the U.S. played a role in 3 assassination attempts, one against Diem of Vietnam, which was successful, one against Duvalier Sr., Papa Doc of Haiti, which was not successful, and one against the leader of the Dominican Republic, Trujillo, which was successful. Whether we have to add JFK himself to the list of assassination victims of the U.S. government, I will leave to you to decide. One final observation I'd like to make. If the U.S. can bomb the Iraqi intelligence headquarters, which was the target of the bombing in 1993, because of an assassination plot against an American leader, and cite self-defense under the UN Charter, which we did, think of the opportunities open to countries like Panama and Libya and Cuba, to name but a few. Cuba could bomb CIA headquarters many times, not to mention Miami. Something tells me that the White House would not accept this in a court of law. They would not even see the irony, I think. Thank you very much.
That's very good. Now we're going to hear from Mr. Donald Gibson, PhD. Mr. Gibson fascinates me because he doesn't talk too much about himself, but he was a professor of sociology at the University of Pittsburgh, received his PhD degree from the University of Delaware, taught several colleges. But let me tell you what he did. He wrote a book. His articles appeared in many publications, but he wrote a book called Battling Wall Street, the Kennedy Presidency. Something tells me that we're going to hear a lot more about this book and the subject, upcoming stuff that I know is coming out from their various columnists who are writing now. A few columnists are already investigating these days. Most of them are just taking the handouts, I'm sorry to say. But we're looking forward to reading this book, Battling Wall Street, the Kennedy Presidency, because we know that there's a lot of material coming up and we'll hear from him. Mr. Gibson, will you take the microphone?
I'm going to talk a little bit about recent work that I've been doing, which is an attempt to get as high up in the cover-up of the Kennedy assassination as possible. And what I'm going to focus on here today for a few minutes is the creation of the Warren Commission, and then a quick overview of some of the stages of the cover-up. Until 1993, it was impossible for outsiders to accurately reconstruct the process by which the so-called Warren Commission was created. As far as I've been able to determine, only one person made an accurate statement about that during the last 30 years. That person had serious credibility problems, and I'll come back to that in a second. From 1963 to 1993, the creation of the Warren Commission was variously attributed to LBJ, Abe Fortas, or Nicholas Katzenbach. The Warren Commission itself implied that it was LBJ. 15 years later, the House Select Committee suggested that the idea came from Katzenbach. That House Select Committee had an opportunity to clear up this issue and opted not to do so. That is, Katzenbach testified in front of the committee that the proposal to create the Warren Commission came from people outside of the government, and the House staff did not even bother to ask him who those people were. The Commission's and the Select Committee's accounts were wrong, as was the story about Abe Fortas that was picked up by various writers. As president, LBJ certainly created the Commission in an official sense, but he was not the source of the idea, and he had to be pressured into supporting it. Fortas was against it, or at most neutral, and he did not come up with the idea. Nicholas Katzenbach, then Deputy Attorney General, did become involved, but he acted at the behest of others, and he was initially a half-hearted participant. The only person between 1963 and 1993 to come close was Lyndon Johnson. His brief account appeared in his 1971 book, The Vantage Point, Perspectives of the Presidency, 63 to 69. LBJ said in that book, quote, "The idea of a national commission was first mentioned to me by Eugene Rostow of the Yale Law School. He called the White House the day Oswald was shot and suggested that the prime suspect, now dead, a blue ribbon commission was needed to ascertain the facts. Dean Rusk and the columnist Joseph Alsop soon made the same recommendations to me." Close quote. As far as it goes, this is an accurate statement. It is more accurate than the information produced by the House Select Committee, and it was in the public domain years before the Select Committee did its work. Johnson's account was ignored by everyone, the well-intended perhaps along with the dishonest. Why? Perhaps it was Johnson's claim in the same section of that book that Bob Kennedy picked Dulles and McCloy for the commission. That appears to be completely wrong. Such a statement perhaps undermined the credibility of the rest of his account. Perhaps it was LBJ's reputation for lying that led people to ignore this account. And there's, I don't know if on our compressed time I should do this, but there's an old story about LBJ, you know, two people were standing around in 1967 and one asked the other, how do you know when LBJ's lying? And the other one says, well, you know he's not lying when he's pulling his ear, rubbing his nose, hiking up his pants. And the second person getting frustrated says, yeah, but well, when is he lying? And he says, well, whenever he opens his mouth. Anyway, Johnson's story about the creation of the Warren Commission went ignored, but it is now supported by the White House telephone tapes and other documents available since 1993. While JFK was in Dallas, the White House taping system was changed. There is an extensive but probably not complete record of LBJ phone conversations which begin on November 22nd. These transcripts and other documents show that LBJ was initially opposed to the creation of the Warren Commission, that Fortas was irrelevant, and that Katzenbach acted for others. Those transcripts also show that it was in fact Eugene Rostow, along with at least one unidentified person, who initiated the effort to have a presidential commission established, and he did this within 1 hour or so of following the death of Lee Harvey Oswald on the 24th. In that hour or so after Oswald's death, Rostow first talked about a commission with Deputy Attorney General Katzenbach, perhaps 3 separate times within that hour. And then he called LBJ aide Bill Moyers because he was concerned that Katzenbach was not making a real effort to push the commission idea. Rostow got from Moyers a promise that Moyers would discuss this with LBJ. On the following morning, the 25th of November, Rostow was joined in the effort to convince LBJ to create the Warren Commission by Joseph Alsop. Alsop called LBJ at 10:40. He tried a variety of methods to pressure LBJ into accepting the commission idea, mixing his tactics as the conversation proceeded. He stroked and praised LBJ, he criticized LBJ, he begged him, and he instructed him. Alsop alternately denigrated himself and presented himself as the ultimate wise man. In this effort to pressure LBJ into creating a commission, which Alsop said would work with the FBI, Alsop refers repeatedly to former Secretary of State Dean Acheson, indicating that Acheson was an important figure pushing the commission idea. Alsop, in fact, represented himself at times either as Acheson's partner in this or as Acheson's agent. The available record now shows that LBJ was turned around, transformed from an opponent of the commission idea on November 24th into a supporter of the commission by November 28th. and there are events in those 4 days that I don't know we'll ever get at. But we now know with certainty that Rostow and Alsop were important figures in this. The record also shows that Dean Rusk became an active supporter of the commission. It is almost certain that Dean Acheson played a role. I suspect that no one will ever be able to identify the individuals who did the shooting on November 22nd. I mean, if we can, great. But what we may be able to do, though, with the available information now is to accurately reconstruct the cover-up process in a new and fuller way. The men who investigated the creation of the, instigated the creation of the commission were part of the Eastern establishment, the groups of men tied to the country's most important financial and corporate institutions, to the media, to the leading law firms, and to the world of covert operations. We perhaps cannot be certain of the exact level at which these men operated, but it is certain that they were part of that network of old and big money which has actively sought to dominate the United States and the world for over a century. Rostow and whoever he was with on November 24th, Alsop, Rusk, and Acheson applied the pressure on LBJ to create the commission, which would produce the patently false assertion that Oswald was a lone assassin. This commission had to be created in order to control the amount and nature of the information which would be passed on to the public. It also had to be created in order to prevent congressional inquiries. It is clear from the record now available that it was those possible hearings in the Senate and in the House that most worried the people promoting the commission. That the FBI would be involved in the investigation was an assumed fact. The proposed Texas Board of Inquiry may or may not have been of some concern, but it was not a primary concern. I am suggesting, and I intend to prove as much as is possible, that the creation of the commission not only led to the cover-up, but was itself part of the cover-up process that featured several distinct stages. And what I have, 3 minutes left or so?
Oh, you've got about 1 minute.
1 minute.
Tell us some more if you don't.
Okay,
Tell us some
this
more
will be quick.
if you don't mind, about what you said in here about that while Kennedy was in Dallas, that somebody changed the communication system at the White House.
The taping system was changed while he was away. I don't have much. Yeah, the taping system
Was that ordered by Johnson or ordered who?
I don't know. Let me use the 2 minutes, okay? In stage 1, November 22nd to 24th, Oswald is convicted by the media as the lone assassin. This takes place within 12 hours after the assassination. If Oswald was set up, as most or all of us think, it's unremarkable that he became a suspect. It is remarkable, however, that in the newspapers, such as the New York Times, 1 day after the assassination, there are 5 separate statements indicating that Oswald was the lone assassin. The media beat the FBI and J. Edgar Hoover to this conclusion. That Hoover and others in the FBI were going to become involved in the cover-up almost immediately is, of course, fully established. What has been overlooked, however, is that while Hoover was stating his uncertainties about Oswald on the afternoon of the 22nd and the morning of the 23rd, people at the New York Times already had Oswald and Oswald alone convicted. Hoover said in a memo issued at 5:15 on the 22nd that Oswald was probably the man who did it, and then he later said if he were the man. The next day at 10 o'clock, Hoover told LBJ that the case against Oswald was not very, very strong, and then he later said the case as it stands now isn't strong enough to be able to get a conviction. The newspapers were not nearly so reticent, and this has been overlooked at times, I think, by people focusing on the FBI. And other people immediately contributed to this process as well. Tom Wicker, James Reston, and others had Oswald convicted and convicted as the lone assassin almost immediately. The rest of the work I'm doing has to do with how the commission was created, how it was staffed, and then the role of McCloy and Dulles on the commission, including the fact that it was McCloy and Dulles who picked Rankin as the chief counsel, and it was not Warren, as Epstein said in his book, which is completely wrong, and an important fact because Rankin would become a major part of the commission's work. Thanks.
Now we're going to hear from a very unusual investigator, Vince Palamara, a graduate of Duquesne University, considered a leading civilian authority on the Secret Service. If anybody is an authority on it, well, he must be it, because it's very hard to get information out of the Secret Service. They even admit that they were there. He is an authority on the Secret Service for the period from FDR to Reagan. And the Secret Service certainly didn't manage things very well, let Reagan get shot. His work has appeared in Investigative, Back Channels, Lobster, and Fourth Decade. He recently co-produced The Third Alternative, Survivor's Guilt, The Secret Service and the JFK Murder. We'll hear from him now, Mr. Palamara.
Okay, 10 minutes, I guess I'm going to cut to the chase a little bit. My study is basically pretty unique. It's interviewed close to 20 former members of the Secret Service, guarded Kennedy, in fact, guarded from FDR up to President Carter. One might have actually been around the Reagan days, but he was in the field office. And during the course, I'm going to take this off for a second. During the course of my research, I started out with a lot of the same beliefs and a lot of the evidence and a lot of the way things were told to us by Jim Bishop, William Manchester, the Warren Report, et cetera, that, Kennedy didn't want this done, he didn't want the bubble top, he didn't want agents on the back of the limousine, et cetera. And since my natural focus was on the Secret Service, that's always been my area of interest anyway, I delved into that. I believed a lot of those things at first, but then as I found out through interviewing these men and comparing things, primary sources, documents, films, et cetera, through the years, I found out a lot of these things categorically are not true. JFK has been blamed for a lot of things that he supposedly didn't want done security-wise, which aren't true. I'm going to be showing a video in a second, but before I get to that, I'm just going to get to something that relates to earlier. Dr. Randy Robertson, had a presentation about basically, make long story short, the back of the head, JFK was gone, a big, pardon the pun here, bone of contention, with researchers. I know that was bad. But anyway, when I spoke to the driver of the follow-up car, Sam Kinney, reading my notes here, he revealed that having witnessed the assassination from the follow-up car, he was watching the back of President Kennedy's head anyway. He had to maintain a 5-foot distance. That was standard operating procedure, 5-foot distance between his car and the limousine. When the shooting happened, he saw it all happen. He also said there was no missed shot. And that's just what he said. All 3 shots hit their victims. He said the second shot hit Connolly. More importantly, he saw the back of the head go off. Okay? No ifs, ands, or buts about it. He didn't know what the controversy was about. He was wondering what everybody was making a big deal about. Said this to me 2 times. I spoke to him 3 times. The first time we didn't get into the medical evidence. Gets even more interesting. Him and George Hickey were on the C-130 transport plane going back to Washington with the 2 cars, and he found the back part of the head in the limousine hours before the official limousine inspection instigated that night by Assistant Special Agent in Charge Floyd Boring. He said, I don't know what else it could have been but the back of the head. He also said he had no brains left. His brain was blown out. There was brain matter all over the place. It was the right rear. He said that twice. Mine was a big piece. Half his head was gone. It resembled a flower pot or clay pot piece. And he put in a phone patch to Dr. Berkeley while on the C-130, before they even landed in Washington. The piece went to Berkeley, and whatever happened to it, Sam doesn't know, and I guess it's up to us to speculate if it was one of the later pieces they allegedly found in the limousine. But this was separate. He was there also when they did the official limousine inspection, so it's not a matter of memory merge. He's confused. It's definitely delineated. He'll remember it forever. It's one of those things, there's no question about it in his mind, that he found on the C-130. So just a big thing to corroborate Dr. Randy Robertson's work there. I guess now, maybe I'll wait for the video, because due to time constraints.
Is that the piece that Jackie picked up and dropped in the back seat?
That's one, yeah, Clint Hill, Gerald Bain in a report. This shows something here. See all the spectators on this side, right here? Okay, on Kennedy's side? Well, in Secret Service reports by John Reddy and others, they try to make it like, oh, there was no one on that side of the street. Hey, we didn't have to protect Kennedy. Boy, I guess those are all apparitions then. Who are these people? All it takes is one person to be assassin anyway. Look at John Hinckley. I mean, this is ridiculous. Okay. Now, here we go. We see JFK being hit and all that. So we can go into big contention about what is or is not happening. Well, Roy Kellerman, who was number 3 man, I spoke to Jerry Bain, the head of the White House detail. He wasn't there. Number 2 man wasn't there. They had a third stringer. And by the way, I just recently found out this was Roy Kellerman's first trip with the president. He's looking back, first trip on his own, I should say, clarify that. He's looking back at Kennedy, sees he's hit. He says in his Warren Commission testimony, no obstacle will stand in front of me. I will protect this man. Yet, he sees he's hit. Well, he gets the time to tell Bill Greer, which he does now, to get out of line. And Bill Greer's looking back. Ooh, break down Secret Service procedure. So I'll lie about it to the Warren Commission. I didn't see Kennedy. I saw Connolly. Uh-oh, Connolly's hit. Geez, I guess I'll have to improvise something there, too. But anyway, and then Kellerman did tell him to get out of line. We've been hit. Kellerman is putting his hand up to his mouth, a radio microphone. And little Greer here does a second turn on. Just to make sure Kennedy, let's see if he's really hit now. And then pretty soon we'll see, unfortunately, the fatal shot make its mark. Oswald or no Oswald, conspiracy, no conspiracy. We'll talk about this for years, like in ancient Egypt. We'll all go through the conspiracy theories and everything else. But if these Secret Servicemen would have did their job, we wouldn't be talking about it. So maybe we'd be talking about it in the trial, like O.J. Simpson Part 2. We'd be there trying to find out the attempted assassination. Maybe it wouldn't have been such a big deal. There's just so much more to this, and like I said, I don't, time constraints in that. I might have,
Go ahead.
might have a little bit of a fast forward through this. Hold on a second. Mark, can you fast forward a little bit? This is like a little bit of a repeated segment. Okay. Well, it's okay, no problem. I can keep going because I'll have enough time to get to the next couple segments here. And you probably want to watch this again anyway, maybe just to see some of the things. I might as well get to them because I might not have time. Okay, one of the things was supposedly President Kennedy wanted to have agents on the back of the limousine. That was his desire. He wanted an open car and all this business. And there was 5 reports sent to the Warren Commission after the fact 6 months later, only because the Warren Commission requested them, not vice versa. And they said that President Kennedy had told Floyd Boring, and Floyd Boring conveyed the message 4 days before Dallas that Kennedy didn't want agents on the back of the car, so obviously they obeyed it in Dallas, okay? Now, if I go into any further equivocation here, this is the Florida trip. This is the November 18th trip, by the way, right here. This is a little bit of a film clip. Well, make a long story short, those 5 reports in? Well, I spoke to the head of the White House detail, Mr. Boring himself, and he told me it's categorically untrue. Kennedy never, ever, once told them to not do anything security-wise. The only thing this man would do is do what he's doing now, wade into the crowds. There was a real quick, there's Floyd Boring right directly behind Kennedy there, Emory Robertson. This is the only thing Kennedy did that would deal with Secret Service's nerves. It's the only thing, he would wade into the crowds. He never told them not to have the bubble top on, whether it was bulletproof or not. We can go on and on for days and whether it meant anything or not. But Kennedy had nothing to do with the bubble top. Secret Service decision, Sam Kennedy told me about it. It's in his report. He's the sole person to do it. Agents on the limousine, they lied about it in the reports. Think about that. They admitted to me on the phone. Floyd Boring, I spoke to him twice. Jerry Bain, I spoke to him 3 times in one session. Spoke to Sam Kennedy several times. And Clint Hill would not reveal the name of the person in his report. Then he gets in front of our old inspector of the Warren Commission and had to reveal the name of who told him not to have agents in the back of the limousine. It was good old Floyd Boring. And it goes around in a circle because Floyd Boring told me that, and you could say, okay, at the end of the day, what does this mean? This means that they sent reports that were fabricated to the Warren Commission. They blamed it on Kennedy, who was conveniently dead. And it gets right down to it. Well, why weren't there agents in the back of the car? Or you can go on, there's little subplots there. Agents in the back of the car stationed. Agents in the back of the car are supposed to run. It gets even worse, or get better, depending on which way you want to look at it. Here's agents getting on the back of the limousine in Miami. Agents Zaboral and Donald Lawton. Donald Lawton was stationed at Love Field November 22nd, but wasn't doing anything security-wise. They're about to get in the back of the limousine there.
I think we better conclude now.
Okay. That's not it?
That's it.
I had more time, but...
Keep going. Let it go.
Just 5 minutes? Is that all right? Thank you. Is that all right? Okay. And basically, it's a real crying shame. Then William Manchester picked up the ball, and Jim Bishop picked up the ball. Just basically, laid it all on Kennedy. The bubble top, agents on the limousine, and like I said before, I was, interrupted. I'm sorry about that. Sam Kennedy told me, confirmed to me, Emory Roberts, when the first shot sounded, well, let's say you can pretend, okay, Oswald's first shot, and there was no conspiracy, okay? Emory Roberts ordered the men in the fob car not to move. And the reason why that all came about was, in Harrison Livingston's High Treason, it was written that Emory Roberts ordered the men not to move. I said, well, where's the documentation of this? So I read it to Sam Kinney thinking he's going to refute it, deny it, whatever. He said, exactly right, and I'm involved in that too. He admitted that Emory Roberts did that. He would not give me any kind of valid reason why he did this or not. First shot sounded, Emory Roberts told William Manchester, he recognized the first shot as a shot. This is before the Fed shots, before anything else, where there's plenty of time to protect the president. See, it's scary because it's one thing to do these things, and it's another thing to blame Kennedy after the fact, and William Manchester and Jim Bishop picked the ball, and George Michael Weavica did a presentation on security stripping, and some of these things might sound like science fiction and conspiratorial and that, but when you realize that they blamed it on Kennedy and they're not true, then it brings us right back down to Dallas. Why weren't these things happening? Why did they have to make up a story about November 18th that Kennedy said these things? Now, the Secret Service did a wonderful job at Love Field. This is like modern day stuff they did here. They did a great job with the Trade Mart, which they never arrived at. They had men secured everywhere. I can go on for days about why they should never have been going to the Trade Mart anyway. The early reports were like, it's a bad building, let's go to the Woodlands building. 3 checks of the PRS's files that's for threats. In the city of Dallas, they found not one threat. Roy Kellerman to the Warren Commission, Abraham Bolden to me even said that that was totally unusual. And right here, we'll see them get in the back of the limousine here. And I think I just need one more minute and I'll be done. I just wanted to just get to one more thing here. It's in sequence with this video. Oh, yeah, another huge bone of contention here with research. This has been going on for a couple decades now about the motorcade route, whether it was changed or not. Well, another thing, spoke to Jerry Bain, head of the White House detail, who did not make the Dallas trip. He confirmed to me the motorcade route was changed. Said it to me twice. He didn't know the reasons why because he wasn't there. The House Select Committee asked him off the record in an executive session, why was the motorcade route changed? So they knew to ask him this. Something was amiss that they knew this. And then he said, well, he said to me, well, I know the motorcade route was changed, but why, I don't know. There was alternative routes. Sam Kinney confirmed to me that there were alternate routes. So this big thing about whether they should have went down Maine, Houston, that these are security matters that conspiracy or no conspiracy, Oswald or no Oswald, they're blamed on JFK, and these things found out not to be true. And it really makes you think about, we'll be sitting here right now in this conference or any conference or any of these books, if these men would have did their job. Final thing I want to point out here, this clip is the reason why this is slow-mo. This is ABC footage of leaving Love Field. That's Henry Ribka there on JFK's side, about to do his job. So he was informed of these fraudulent desires. But Emory Roberts raises up, and he's in the follow-up car, and he's going like this to say, hey, no, don't get on the back of the limousine, no. And Henry Ribka is basically going like, what? What's the deal, Because Emory Roberts basically told him right there, stand up, like what's going on. And good old Henry Ribka was going back to Love Field and was checking on luggage when President Kennedy was shot. And Henry Ribka's incredulity here continues because you can see him. He does it a few times. Even in regular speed, you see, but I wanted you to see Emory Roberts raises out of his seat and goes like this. He was the commander of the fog car who later ordered the men not to move after the first shot's on. He recognized it as a shot. So,
which guy's Emory Roberts?
He's sitting right next to the driver of the fog car. And I don't know if you can see him. It's sort of seeing his top of his head now. That's John Reddy. John, another thing, to Clint Hill, all this crap about Clint Hill, he's crying about what he could have did. He was assigned to Jackie. It was John Reddy's responsibility to protect President Kennedy, not Clint Hill. He was assigned to Jackie. Clint Hill even did his job, although we can argue about that. But let's say he did his job. What about John Reddy? Where's his tears? Well, Sam Kinney told me he doesn't go to any of the annual Secret Service reunions. He's disappeared off the face of the earth. Never saw him again after 2 weeks in the White House detail after that with LBJ. And that's it.
Excellent.
Atmosphere.
Yeah, I'm sorry for taking much time. I mean, you guys can go for longer. I didn't want to hold it.
Now we're going to hear from Mr. William Kelley. Mr. Kelley has a microphone. Excuses. We're now going to hear from Mr. William Kelley. Mr. Kelley has a very interesting life. Mr. Kelley, will you please take over?
Sure. First of all, I want to thank John Judge for taking over such a managerial position with COPA and allowing me to continue my research that I've been doing.
Mr. Kelley, we want to hear a little more about you. You're from Ocean City, New Jersey. Your articles appeared in Fourth Decade and Prologue, and you're a co-founder of the Committee on Open Archives. His special area of interest is Cuban-American relations and history.
It is my contention that if a normal homicide investigation took place, or will take place, we can bring indictments down against individuals for crimes related to the assassination. And if a normal homicide investigation would take place, it would go by the book written by William Kessler and Paul Weston called The Detection of Murder, in which they say that one of the most important factors in an initial investigation is to reconstruct the last hours and last days of the deceased. Who saw him last, where he went, and what he did in the period preceding his death are what must be reconstructed. And it is this reconstruction of this period that most often reveals the true facts surrounding the unexplained death. One of the last things that President Kennedy did before leaving Dallas was have a meeting in the Oval Office with McGeorge Bundy, his national security advisor. Their discussion was a very delicate matter concerning unofficial back-channel communications that had been established with Fidel Castro. After meeting with the President, Bundy wrote a memo to William Atwood instructing him as soon as JFK returned from Texas to meet personally with the President, quote, to see how the matter was progressing and the results of the last meeting with Lechuga. Carlos Lechuga was the Cuban ambassador to the United Nations and the former Cuban ambassador to Mexico. He was talking privately with Atwood at the UN. William Atwood was a schoolmate of President Kennedy at Choate Academy. He was a Kennedy campaign worker, speechwriter, editor of Look and Newsweek, and ambassador to Guinea. He was also an integral part of the secret back-channel communications Kennedy had established with Fidel Castro. Kennedy had previously used journalists as intermediaries during the Cuban Missile Crisis, and he had talked with French journalist Jean Daniel, who went to Cuba and was with Castro when Castro was notified of Kennedy's death. There was also ABC TV reporter Lisa Howard, who had previously interviewed Kennedy, Castro, and Khrushchev, and it was Howard who instigated the meeting between Atwood and Lechuga. According to Lechuga's version of events, Lisa Howard invited him to a private party to meet Atwood in September 1963. Atwood went to the party at Lisa Howard's apartment and talked with Lechuga in the corner for a couple of hours. The next day, Atwood returned to Washington, where he met personally with Attorney General Robert Kennedy and reported on his discussions. When Atwood returned to New York, he told Lechuga that Robert Kennedy was in agreement, but warned him to be very careful that words of the talk did not leak out, because if the Republicans found out, they would make an issue of it during the campaign. This is to say nothing of what the anti-Castro Cubans would have thought about the discussion, since they were trying to kill Castro at the time. According to Lechuga, Robert Kennedy told Atwood to inform National Security Advisor McGeorge Bundy about the talks, and Bundy assigned an assistant to serve as a liaison between them. Atwood and Lechuga met several times at private meetings at the UN, and Atwood told Lechuga that Kennedy had also given his okay to the talks, and they had set up an agenda for further meetings. Before leaving for Texas, Kennedy met with Bundy and discussed these talks, and Bundy left a memo on Atwood's desk instructing him to, as soon as Kennedy returned from Dallas, or from Texas, to meet with him personally to inform him of the progress of the talks. Instead, Kennedy returned in the casket, and it was left to LBJ to meet with Atwood. LBJ said he had read the memo with great interest and was going to let him know how to proceed, but instead, Atwood was reassigned as ambassador to Nigeria, and the whole project disbanded. The significance of the Atwood-Lechuga communications and their connection to the assassination lies not within the nature of the talks, but with who was sleeping with who. It was Atwood, while they were schoolmates, who introduced JFK to Mary Pinochet Meyer. She would become a lifelong friend and intimate lover of Kennedy, and also husband to Cord Meyer, who was co-founder of the World Federalist Union. And the World Federalists were set up to lobby for a strong UN. They wanted a world government at first, but they fell back on the position of strengthening the power of the United Nations. They were particularly strong in Philadelphia, where Michael Payne's mother helped establish the World Federalist conventions. Two of them were organized by Ruth Forbes Payne Young. Two other World Federalists at the same time in Philadelphia were Ruth Payne and a college student named Priscilla Johnson. Before she married Arthur Young, Ruth Forbes was married to Michael Payne's father, Lyman Payne, the founder of the Trotskyite Party. And she was also a close personal friend of Mary Bancroft, who was a lover of Allen Dulles and an intimate associate of him in Switzerland during his OSS days. It was Allen Dulles who appointed Cord Meyer to replace Tom Braden as head of the CIA International Organizations Division, which was responsible for the CIA's covert use of private and philanthropic organizations like the National Student Association, the World Federalist Union, and the Catherwood Foundation. Besides her association with Cord Meyer's World Federalist, Ruth Forbes Payne Young also helped establish at the UN an organization called the International Peace Academy, which was set up to bring together young diplomats in social settings to allow them to overcome Cold War stereotype behavior and talk in a social setting similar to the atmosphere that existed at Lisa Howard's apartment where Lechuga and Atwood met. In September '63, just as Lechuga and Atwood were meeting at the UN, Ruth Payne traveled to the East Coast to visit relatives, including the Forbes family island off Massachusetts, and on her return trip to Arthur and Ruth Young in Philadelphia. She then drove to New Orleans, where she picked up Marina and the alleged assassination rifle and drove them to Dallas while Oswald went to Mexico City. In Mexico, Oswald visited the Cuban embassy where he met with a Mexican national named Sylvia Duran. A rumor was later floated that Duran had a sexual encounter with Oswald, which was totally unsubstantiated. But what has been established is that Duran did have a sexual relation with none other than Carlos Lechuga. This is revealed in recently released files and is mentioned prominently in John Newman's book, Oswald and the CIA. Whoever sent Oswald to meet Duran did so purposely to link him with Lechuga and the Cubans before the assassination. So it is not so who was affiliated with who in the international organizational chart, but who was intimately involved with who. JFK and Mary Meyer, Ruth Forbes Payne and Arthur Young, Mary Bancroft and Allen Dulles, and most significantly, Sylvia Duran and Carlos Lechuga. The Duran-Lechuga liaison was kept secret not to protect the secret and sensitive sources and methods, but because of the significance of the back-channel communications between Kennedy, Castro, Atwood, and Lechuga, the details of which exposed the covert operatives who had Kennedy killed. If a normal homicide investigation took place, and the investigator had these facts at his disposal, as the intelligence analysts who censored it did, they would have begun to decipher and unravel the covert intelligence network that conducted these operations that led to the death of the president. Now we are left with that task. Thank you.
And you gave us a little time. Thank you very much. Very interesting. Now, Mr. Bochan. Here for Mr. Steve Bochan. Mr. Bochan has a very interesting history. He's a regional manager for National Amusements Incorporated, the owner and operator of the Multiplex and Showcase Cinemas, and parent company of Viacom, Paramount Pictures, MTV, VH1, Showtime, and the Movie Channel. He researches JFK's murder at National Archives 2 and participates in the CompuServe Political Debate Forum.
Thank you. Many debaters who argue for the official version accuse those of us who argue for conspiracy. It has been 32 years and still no one has come forward with a coherent theory that matches all the available evidence in the case. Some even accuse us of concentrating on the minutiae and the irrelevant details, or nitpicking, that have no bearing on the conclusion of the case. That is, the official version of the conclusion of the case that Lee Harvey Oswald was the lone assassin. In response, I would submit that one, since we haven't been able to view all the available evidence in almost 32 years now, how could a coherent scenario possibly be formed? Two, what else are we supposed to concentrate on but the minutiae and the details that haven't been addressed properly by those who have given us the official version and assured us that a lone nut who couldn't shoot wounds that moved, and a magic bullet were responsible for removing our 35th president. Most researchers of the JFK assassination community know that by studying the official documentation available, little gems can sometimes be found that point away from the official version. And once in a while, these little gems help provide clues to comprehending what at first might appear to be irrelevant details. It's to one of those details that occurred in New Orleans that I now turn to, and hopefully provide some understanding for one piece of the puzzle. The problem is every time you understand one piece of the puzzle, more questions surface, especially on the validity of the official version. The detail of which I am speaking can be found in the official documentation on the so-called Bolton Ford dealership episode. The little gem is located in Volume 10 of the HSCA volumes. It is the name of Gerard F. Tujade. Remember that name. T-U-J-A-G-U-E. As most students of the assassination know, a salesman named Oscar Deslatti of the Bolton Ford dealership in New Orleans was visited by two men who claimed to represent a group called the Friends of Democratic Cuba on January 20th, 1961. These men wanted to buy 10 trucks from Mr. Deslatti, and the man who did most of the talking identified himself as Joseph Moore. As price was discussed, Moore said that he thought they should get the trucks for no profit for his organization, since theirs was a worthy cause. Mr. Deslatti told the FBI later that Moore did not specify whether the trucks would be used here in the United States or in Cuba. When Mr. Deslatti checked with his manager, Fred Sewell, it was decided to give the gentleman a break in the price and reduce the usual profit margin from $75 per truck to $50 per truck. As Deslatti was filling out the order for the 10 trucks, he wrote in Joseph Moore's name as the buyer representing the Friends of Democratic Cuba. Seeing this, Moore told Deslatti to change the name on the bid from Moore to Oswald. It was at this point that the second gentleman spoke up and said that Oswald was his name, and it should go on the form as he was the man with the money and would pay for the trucks if they were purchased. The real Oswald in January 1961 was, of course, in the Soviet Union. So the question is, why were these people representing the Friends of Democratic Cuba impersonating Oswald in January 1961? Who were the Friends of Democratic Cuba? Had the FBI sought this answer after the assassination by locating the articles of incorporation of the Friends of Democratic Cuba, they would have discovered two things. One, the Friends of Democratic Cuba was formed on January 6, 1961, a mere 2 weeks prior to the Bolton Ford dealership episode, where not only the name Oswald was being used, but in fact Oswald was being impersonated. And two, Guy Bannister, ex-FBI, who was once commendated by Hoover while he headed the Chicago FBI office, was on the board of directors for the Friends of Democratic Cuba. Most researchers know this, as does anyone who saw the film JFK. At any rate, the FBI didn't seem very interested in Deslatti's tale, especially since Deslatti couldn't identify the photograph of Lee Harvey Oswald that they showed to him 3 days after the assassination, nor was he able to give a good description of either man to them. He told them that the reason he remembered the incident was because of the name of the organization represented, not by the name Oswald. Deslatti called the FBI after the president was assassinated, and after confirming with his manager, Fred Sewell, about the two guys who were in here from Cuba trying to buy some buses cheap. Of course, it makes perfect sense that Deslatti didn't think the photograph of Oswald was either Joseph Moore or the other man who said he was Oswald, because the real Oswald was not in New Orleans in 1961. Whoever identified himself as Oswald was not the real Oswald. And even though Dislati thought enough of the incident to contact the FBI after the assassination, they either dismissed or ignored the incident. It is not to be found in the Warren report at all. But the evidence was that an organization recently formed by Guy Bannister, rabid anti-communist, was trying surreptitiously purchase 10 trucks, probably in preparation for the Bay of Pigs, and was also using the name and impersonating a defector to the communists, Oswald. But where did Bannister's new organization get the name Oswald? There are a couple possibilities. Bannister kept a newspaper file on defectors. That's one. David Ferry knew Oswald during his teenage years in the CAP. That's two. But the strongest evidence indicates that at least one corporate officer of the Friends of Democratic Cuba actually knew the real Harvey Oswald. That person is Gerard F. Touget. He's listed as the vice president for the Friends of Democratic Cuba in the Articles of Incorporation. How did Touget know the real Harvey Oswald? It's part of that gem that's located in footnote 64 on page 143, volume 10 of the HSCA.
You want to sum up now?
Yes.
So what's the answer?
That footnote is as follows. Staff review of FBI files for Guy Bannister. Coincidentally, Gerard F. Touget, owner of Touget Incorporated Forwarding Company, who had employed Oswald as a messenger from November 1955 to January 1956, who was also a member and officer, vice president of Friends of Democratic Cuba.
Thank you.
One more second, if I could. The FBI did interview Mr. Touget on November 26th. The report's in the archives. Nowhere does it mention the Friends of Democratic Cuba or his connection to Guy Bannister. With proof that Oswald was known personally to officers of a group Bannister was connected with for the purpose of aiding anti-Castro activities as early as 1961, it becomes fairly easy to see how this might have paved the way for later anti-Castro activities during the summer of 1963, with Bannister and Oswald once again taking center stage. Thanks.
We'll now hear from Kathleen Cunningham. Sorry, sir.
All right, can I,
We didn't mean any affront to you, sir, but this happened to be the way this added on the list. Go ahead.
can I have the lights down, please?
Now, Kathleen Cunningham, I want to tell you about her. She's a very unusual person. If you turn the lights down, I can't read about you. Anyway, she has the largest database on the medical evidence existing. And she has been a practicing nurse, a very serious student of the Kennedy assassination for over 14 years. Her special interests include the events at Bethesda, the pathologist claimed ignorance of the throat wound, and statements made since Kennedy's autopsy by witnesses.
Thank you very much. Can we have the lights on now? Ladies and gentlemen, for those of you who are at the HSCA panel, I'd like to elaborate a little bit on some of the remarks I made there. According to a 1965 memorandum from Pierre Fague, one of the three pathologists who performed President Kennedy's autopsy, following the procedure, he and the other pathologists were ordered not to discuss the autopsy with anyone, not with each other, and not even the investigators involved. The HSCA, although aware of this, still chose to interview the other two pathologists 6 months before it was able to get the Departments of Navy and Defense to agree to modify or rescind this order. Why this was done remains a mystery. Nonetheless, these two vital witnesses jointly testified while officially gagged that this fact could have slipped past the panel that interviewed them as doubtful, as evidenced by the pathologist's response to the very first question they were invited to answer. This simple and unobtrusive question was to ask the condition of the president's adrenal glands. Yet despite the fact that this issue had been publicly disclosed in the Warren Commission testimony of Parkland Hospital physician Paul Peters, Dr. Humes, the head pathologist, refused to answer the question, citing strong personal reasons and certain other obligations that made it not preferable. So it is ironic that the Select Committee chose to cite their conclusion that there were no outside influences or controls on the scope of the autopsy using a quote from one of the doctors made in this same interview. The evidence that the HSCA had at their disposal was literally rift with signs of official interference during the autopsy. Worse, it extended into the writing of the reports and even into the testimony of the pathologists. But the committee either excused these away, usually with an assertion that these doctors were incompetent, or simply did not address them. Although a discussion of the interference is outside of the scope of this panel, several examples will be addressed in the course of my presentation. The specific instances I will talk about all may lead to clues that just may identify the person who was behind this interference. The initial clue is found in a CBS document that reveals that Jim Schneider, a personal acquaintance of both Dr. Humes and Boswell, had asserted to CBS that Humes told him, quote, he had orders from someone he refused to disclose other than stating it was not Robert Kennedy to not do a complete autopsy. Thus, the autopsy did not go into Kennedy's kidney disease, etc. If this is true and accurate, we can conclude two things. First, the scope of the autopsy was limited by someone whom Humes felt he had to take orders from, and second, that the same unidentified person ordered the physicians to omit the adrenal glands from the autopsy report. For people in the audience who are not familiar with medical terminology and the medical evidence in this particular case, the jump from kidney disease to adrenal glands is not a jump at all. Kennedy's medical records are, for the most part, available and contain not even a suggestion of kidney disease. However, it is well documented that the president suffered from adrenal insufficiency. As an adrenal gland sits at the top of each kidney, it is quite likely that Mr. Schneider's kidney disease was a layman's attempt to explain this rather rare disorder. The next clue can be found in the previously discussed memo Fink wrote to his commanding officer. In it, he asserted that an officer who outranked him refused to allow him to call the autopsy incomplete. He also reported that the same person claiming Fink's concern was of academic interest only denied him access to the clothing the president was wearing when killed, and this is a forensically vital examination. And finally, Fink alleged that the autopsy report did not mention the adrenal glands because of restrictions placed on the scope of the procedure by the Kennedy family. Thus, Fink confirmed the two issues disclosed in the CBS memo. One, the restrictions on the autopsy caused the adrenal glands to be omitted from the report, and two, calling the autopsy complete was forced upon the pathologist. We are further led to believe that these two breaks with protocol originated from the same person, a person who outranked Lieutenant Colonel Fink. We can also conclude that this person prevented Fink from examining the clothing, and we can speculate that he had little or no medical background, or he would not have felt the request to see the clothing was an academic one. Further, earlier in the memo, Fink's wording had strongly implied that it was Dr. Humes who had insisted that the autopsy be reported as complete. But Fink qualified this by adding that it was due to restrictions the Kennedy family had placed upon the autopsy. Because Humes had personally requested Fink be present to add his forensic expertise, along with supporting testimony that proves that Fink was exercising that expertise, it seems unreasonable to believe that Humes would suddenly deny him on so minor a point. Moreover, Fink is clear that the person who denied him the right to examine the clothing and who insisted the autopsy be called complete were one and the same. It is impossible to believe that Humes, the ranking pathologist, at the United States Navy's largest teaching hospital would think this request academic. This line of thinking is supported by one additional point. During Fick's testimony to the HSCA medical panel, he elaborated a bit on his seeming implication that it was Humes that overrode his decision to call the autopsy incomplete, stating that Humes had said this because they had accomplished the goals of the autopsy. As they had in no way even met the minimum requirements for forensic autopsy, it has to be concluded that in implying that Humes was the man who denied him the clothing, Fink had either very poorly chosen his words, giving a false impression, or that his words were very carefully selected to purposefully mislead and thereby hide the identity of the person who really refused him these items. Further, when viewed in these lights, Hume's words to Fink could well have been meant to appease Fink, who was facing an otherwise impossible situation. Until the recent release of HSCA material, that is where we sat. The only further information we had appeared in documents prepared by White House physician Admiral Berkeley. Berkeley, who had accompanied the president to Dallas.
We're a little bit over time then.
Oh, yeah. Oh, you want me to?
Go ahead and finish.
Okay. In each of these, Berkeley took full credit for supervising the autopsy, but a careful review of all of Berkeley's statements proved that a majority of the remarks he made are exaggerations, each making his role appear more important than it truly was. Further, many of the points he raised are demonstrably false. Nevertheless, there is usually a touch of truth in his remarks, truth twisted by an omission of fact. Such appears to be the case with his claim that he controlled the autopsy. In 1993, an HSCA memorandum on a staff interview with the third pathologist, Dr. Boswell, was released. With the information contained in it, the loop of evidence thus far discussed appears to have closed while implicating the man behind the orders. That document confirms that the adrenals were omitted because of an order from Dr. Berkeley. Before jumping to the conclusion that the puppet master might be Admiral Berkeley, the memo also reports that, and if you can save me time, read it up there yourself, that the commanding officer was even responding to Berkeley's wishes, and that McNamara was essentially the person that was issuing the orders. Am I too far over? If Robert McNamara was responsible for these breaks in procedure, it would certainly fit what I have so far speculated. One, that he would not recognize the importance of the clothing. Two, he outranked Fink. And three, Dr. Humes would most definitely feel he had to take orders from him. Further, if it was Secretary of Defense McNamara who had issued these orders, Dr. Boswell's claim that his own commanding officer, which was contrary to military procedure, was allowing a non-physician to manipulate these events, then makes a lot of sense. McNamara was the top of the chain of command. The only person who could countermand his orders was the President of the United States. Had this been attempted in a civilian hospital with civilian pathologists, they could have simply disregarded McNamara's suggestions. But because these doctors were military officers in a military hospital, they had no choice but to obey. My search for further information on this point has been thus far futile. The archives claims to possess no information on Berkeley that would relate in any way to the autopsy. And that's why I'm presenting this to this panel today. It is an investigative lead. It's outside of my field of expertise, and I'm hoping that someone out there can pick this point up and carry it on to its full fruition. Thank you very much.
We have a wonderful, wonderful bunch of people here today. Now we're going to talk to Mr. Anthony Marsh. Mr. Marsh has an unusual life. He was born in Washington. His father worked for National Security Agency, that's a secret agency out here. But his father resigned. He doesn't say why. I'm glad he did. Anyway, this fellow here is today a bus driver, but he also is a musician. He's a great, well-known trombonist in New England. But he became very interested in the Vietnam War and protested very violently and joined Mark Lane's group, protested the Vietnam War. What can we do for you, son?
Just stick to what's tell them the right questions then. Now.
Write down your questions now.
I'm sorry, I forgot to tell you all to prepare your questions now because we will pick them up at the end of this talk. We have a lady who's going to pick them up from the audience. Now, as we were saying, I want you to know about this gentleman. He became a member of Mark Lane's group, and then he decided that there was just not enough information about JFK's death, and it should be much more investigated. So he's done a great job of that, and he has an unusual approach to this. Mr. Marsh.
Thank you. The best witness to the JFK assassination was the presidential limousine itself. As other researchers have pointed out, eyewitness testimony can be unreliable. Witnesses can be confused, lie, misremember events, and can be susceptible to suggestion. The damage to the limousine tells a story of its own, an accurate and truthful account of the events in Dealey Plaza. One of the most important points of damage is the dent of the chrome topping above the windshield. If you read 6 Seconds in Dallas, you know the story about that. James Rowley, head of the Secret Service, claimed that the dent was caused by routine maintenance way back in November of '61, and the Warren report is ambiguous and didn't even bother to look at the photographs available to try to resolve the question. One of the photographs they could have looked at would be this first one, which was taken by Tom Dillard at Love Field. There were many photographs taken at Love Field. Now, normally the person who's riding in the Secret Service follow-up car is the official White House photographer, but he was not riding in the Secret Service follow-up car that day. Dave Powers was instead, and Dave Powers took photos and film that have yet to be made public. But the day before, he was riding in the Secret Service follow-up car, and this is one of the photographs he took. This next one is a close-up, blow-up of another photograph that he took the day before the assassination, and shows this area of the chrome topping, which is undented. This is just the day before the assassination. It seems that the House Select Committee didn't even bother addressing the issue of the dented chrome topping, although Bob Groden did state at a conference a few years ago that he examined the chrome topping at the National Archives along with an HSCA staff member and found that the indentation in the chrome topping was exactly the same size and same characteristic curvature as the nose of a CE 399 Magic Bullet, which seems to suggest that it was hit by the nose portion of a fragment from a bullet. One of the interesting theories that I've been able to disprove, I hope, easily, is the theory that the rear seat was raised during the motorcade in order to make JFK a better target for the assassin, and that the Secret Service agents raised him, or someone raised the seat to make him a better target. This photograph of an earlier motorcade shows what the car looks like when when it's in a normal position. And this shows where the rear seat, if you look very carefully here where the dot is.
And the easel will be raised up.
Okay. Oh, you can leave that one off. There's another set of things. Yeah, send bits around with it.
Can you see it?
You want me to walk around it?
Anyway, you can look at it later. But this photograph shows what the rear seat...
On the left, the left arm.
Okay. But this photograph shows what the rear seat actually does look like when it is raised about 5 inches. And this shows the normal position. And on the right we have a photograph. This is Mark North's Act of Treason, if you've read that book. It's head of Secret Service bomb sitting in the rear seat when it's in its fully raised position, so that you can see very easily the differences. And you can see very clearly that during the motorcade, if you look at the photographs of the limousine during the motorcade, the rear seat was not raised. You can tell the difference very easily just by comparison. Another point of damage which is very well known to people is the damage to the windshield. If you look at the CE 350, which is the best known example, taken just a few hours after the assassination, you'll see that there's a crack right there in the windshield. And if you look at the blow-up that I've made of that photograph, you can see the crack in more detail. There was no hole in the windshield, contrary to the opinion of some people that thought there was a hole. And if you examine that very carefully, you can see it's just a crack. Some people have speculated that the windshield was switched. I don't happen to believe that it could have been switched that quickly, and I believe that the pattern of the cracks matches up well enough, and the pattern of damage indicates that it's the same windshield. There's one point of damage which no one else, as far as I know, has ever found before, and I think I'm the first one to point it out. If you look very carefully at the rear view mirror, you'll notice that that is dented, that is damaged. And I've made a blow-up on the far side, and you can see that the rear view mirror is damaged. What's interesting about that is it confirms one theory about the direction of the shots, and that is that the shot which hit the windshield was a shot from behind. And when it fragmented, the bullet fragmented, one of the fragments hit the windshield, bounced back, and hit the back of the rear view mirror. There's no other way that the back of the rear view mirror could be hit. If a bullet had gone through the windshield, there's nothing to ricochet back. The other interesting thing is, if that did happen, as I suppose it did, the way that it ricocheted to the right, if you notice where the crack is, it would have ricocheted back towards the right, suggests that this fragment must have been coming from the left in order to ricochet back towards the right to hit the back of the rear view mirror. JFK was never to the left side of the limousine. Connolly was not to the left side of the limousine when he was hit in the back. The only time that anyone was on the left side of the limousine was when Connolly had slumped into his wife's lap after he had been shot, and he was sloped over to the side. And the only thing that possibly could have been hit at that time, but hadn't been hit yet, because Kennedy was hit, Connolly was hit in the back, was Connolly's wrist. So it seems logical to me that what happened was a fragment from one of the shots hit Connolly's wrist, ricocheted up into the chrome topping area. Also, another fragment hit the windshield, causing the crack, and ricocheted back and hit the back of the rear view mirror. So just those points of damage alone prove several things. How am I doing on time, Sarah?
I think she's out of there.
Okay.
We're letting you take over.
All right. Well, since I have the rest of the hour, I'll talk for another half hour. Another thing which seems to be a little bit of a controversy about the limousine damage, what happened to the windshield? And there's some controversy over the windshield being switched or not. And there's one disturbing element that I have not been able to resolve, and no one's been able to resolve. I talked to Dr. Bochan about it, I talked to Andy Purdy about it, and they don't seem to have an answer either. There appears to be, if you look at this photograph of the windshield, this is the photograph of the windshield taken in 1978 by the House Select Committee. If you look on the driver's side, down at the very, very bottom, and all along the edge, there appears to be a massive stain of some type. But is that a blood stain? Is that genuine? Is that authentic? It doesn't appear over on the original taken just a few hours after the assassination, but maybe that's been cropped out by the way the photograph was taken. When Bochan and Roden and Purdy and other staff members looked at the windshield, they don't remember seeing anything in this area. So is this an artifact that was created later on, or is this an attempt to create another windshield exhibit to substitute for the original?
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. We'll start taking up the cards if for questions. Before we do that, we have a little time here. I want to ask any member of the panel, if they feel that we cut them out of any deep dedication, any particular phase of their testimony that they want to get up and put on in about a half a minute.
Yeah, I got something.
All right, go ahead.
If anyone knows the actual killer of JFK, come up and say it right now.
Thank you so much. What is this? Yeah, this will be good.
Refer to this again.
It's hard when you got these kind of time constraints too. You got to try to put everything in like Evelyn Wood speed reading. But
Come on, Evan Woods, talk about this.
okay, basically, the Secret Service was responsible for. Secret Service was responsible for the motorcade vehicle order too, which was also changed. The limousines, the motorcycles, there was 18 motorcycles allotted Kennedy on all the prior Texas stops, again unique to Dallas. It was changed at the 11th hour by the Secret Service. Allegedly, hey, Kennedy didn't want motorcycles by him because he wanted conversation, but boy, geez, just a few hours before, he didn't mind those motorcycles going right beside him. Ambulance that would have been on standby in case of injury. JFK was gone from the scene a few minutes before the shooting.
How many were there? There weren't 18.
It was 18. It went down to 4, and to make matters worse, that insult to injury, they weren't even right by him. They weren't even riding parallel. And this is all, again, blamed on JFK. And for what it's worth, Sam Kinney and Rufus Youngblood said that there's no truth to that. In fact, Rufus Youngblood threw in an expletive that I can't repeat. Basically, you got a situation to sum up because I'll give somebody else their time. JFK and LBJ were in the same city, same motorcade, and slow-moving open vehicles in close proximity to each other. And this was unique. Winston Lawson told me this, and Abraham Bolden told me this. It's just basically it's the reason why the president and the vice president travel on different planes. You're never supposed to have them in a compromising situation so close to each other. And again, unique to Dallas. And there's old Lee Harvey Oswald. Just a coincidence, I guess.
I want to ask you,
Sure.
There was a great advertisement way ahead of time of Kennedy's route in Dallas. And when myself and another reporter tried to get the route coming up for Houston and San Antonio, they denied it to us. And why that was, I don't know. But then they invited us to get out of the office for asking the question.
Well, I'll tell you what, I got something on that. I do, seriously. Chief James Rowley told the Warren Commission, only because the Warren Commission asked, and it was all in letters, not testimony, he said that he doesn't know who released the route to the press, and it was not done in Dallas. Well, Bill Moyers, LBJ aide, went before the House Select Committee, and he admitted it was the agent in charge of the Dallas trip that gave them, and this was all Secret Service again. Kennedy didn't mind the printing of the American, and all this crap about, JFK, rest in peace, all this stuff that they put on him about his marital affair, all this other crap. I mean, they're stripping him of security and to blame him for it too, but no, they asked you succinctly about the motorcade. Yeah, that's exactly it in a nutshell.
Let me point out to you that man, I asked over and over again to get to talk to that agent, and we kept on doing so.
Was that Bill Payne in Austin? It was Bill Payne?
No, it wasn't an agent. It was the man who arranged the advancing of the trip. Detroit.
That could have been Marty Underwood.
Bill Moyers came up and said he was the one who gave the okay to release the parade route.
Yeah, but he did it in 1978. He told the House Select Committee this was based on the authority of the agent, this is quote, agent in charge of the Dallas trip. Doesn't name him. However, on an A&E special in 1991, it was like Class of the 20th Century, he named the agent in a different context, Bill Payne. He was the advance agent for Austin. However, to make matters even more convoluted, that's why nothing's black and white in this case, Floyd Boring was technically the agent in charge of the entire Dallas trip, a little-known fact. And I spoke to Floyd Boring about this, spoke to Sam Kinney, and again, coincidence rears its ugly head again. The head of the White House detailed Jerry Bain or his immediate assistant, which was Floyd Boring, number 2 man, always accompanied the president.
How did you get these agents to talk? They won't talk to anybody usually.
I tell you what, I think it was my age. I mean, I'm 29 now. It was a few years ago. And I think they figured this is some young whippersnapper. This isn't going anywhere. I didn't reveal an axe. I didn't think Oswald did or didn't do it. I asked questions about security. And I think I flattered them, too, because I knew a lot about these agents.
All right, now, anybody else with a heart-rending story? All right, we have one question already up here, and I presume we'll have a lot more questions.
There's more than one.
Huh? What did you say?
There's more than one.
Oh, I see. All right, fine. A little hard to read these because I'm having eye trouble right now. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, a question for Mr. Gibson. Mr. Gibson, can you tell us more about Rankin's background?
Rankin, the counsel to the Warren Commission.
Unfortunately, the important years...
you better take the microphone, man.
Well, I think probably I can yell loud enough. Unfortunately, so far I've been unable to determine what Rankin was doing the 3 years prior to being picked as the chief counsel. If you go and look up in the Warren Commission, you'll find the bios of every lawyer. He's the only lawyer for whom the years 1960 to 63 are just explained by being in private practice. So I've tried various legal societies. I'm still working on it, but so far no luck.
Wasn't he a Solicitor General?
Until 61, yeah, January 61, and then there's nothing till 63, November,
Who
December.
was it that Warren wanted? Warren Albany?
Warren wanted Albany, right, and Epstein said that Warren changed his mind, and Epstein was lied to by McCloy. Epstein depended on McCloy for the story, and McCloy was the one who actually picked Rankin and who actually objected to Albany.
A question for Mr. Kelley. Is Atwood the same Atwood who was in high foreign affairs positions now in the Clinton administration?
I'm not familiar with the Clinton administration, so I wouldn't be able to answer that. It's A-T-T-W-O-O-D, and he's written 2 books on the matter. And
You don't know if he's still
no,
an active
I intend to interview him soon, and I'll find out what he's doing. But
maybe you can find out while you're here and tell people, because I think that's very interesting. He has a high position. The man by that name has a high position now.
Well, Bill, William Atwood, according to Anthony Summers' article in Vanity Fair last November, he said that William Atwood was told by Bobby Kennedy just before that primary in California that he had to keep the lid on the investigations for security purposes.
mm-hmm.
Is that the same William Atwood?
Yes, it is. Yes.
A question for Mr. Gibson. Was the press not led by
Henry Wade.
Henry Wade at a time when the press thought Oswald would get a trial, would get into a trial?
Henry Wade being the district attorney in Dallas.
Yeah.
Press being led, well, Henry Wade, I believe, 3 or 4 days after. Pardon me?
Oh, lied to?
Oh.
Lied to.
You said that the press immediately went, against Oswald. Basically, wasn't it doing just a lot of reporting of what Henry Wade was saying, and at a time when they thought that Henry Wade had substantiated allegations in court?
The New York Times and the AP had Oswald identified as the lone assassin in less than 12 hours. Captain Fritz, as far as I know, made no public statement to that effect till the next day. Wade said there may be other people involved 3 or 4 days later. These guys vacillated, and Fritz, or Wade and...
Bill Alexander. That night, Bill Alexander, in furtherance of international communist conspiracy.
Yeah, right. There was suggestions of conspiracy of whatever nature. And these guys vacillated over the years, too. I know Wade's changed his mind at different times.
Do the Times source their statements, or do they just make the statements on their own?
No, those statements are not sourced. And if you get the New York Times for November 23rd, really read it carefully. There's some strange statements there, I think. But I'm not drawing a huge conclusion from that in and of itself and by itself. But James Reston certainly was a person with various types of connections. But I'm still, I'm not suggesting they were part of the conscious cover-up. They may or may not have been.
James Reston at present is dying.
Well, we all have to.
Mr. Palamara.
What did you say?
He said we all have to.
Except me, I'm not going to.
This next one is Mr. Blum, the head of the White House Secret Service for 13 years, was fired by Kennedy administration in 1963. He had been Vice President Nixon's personal driver for his last 4 years in that office. Nixon's role in the assassination of JFK is little analyzed despite numerous examples of motive, power, knowledge, and protocols. Only someone with experience could have. Why? Well, I can tell you one thing about Chief Ballman. He was the chief of the Secret Service, not head of the White House detail. He was fired because one of the things that brought up in Mark North's book is he believed the mafia didn't exist. Went in the Washington Post and even said this along with his buddy Hoover. I think it was the natural progression from Eisenhower to Kennedy, and I think it was just time for Huey Ballman to go. But this thing about he had been Vice President Nixon's personal driver for his last 4 years in that office, that was Jack Sherwood. Jack Sherwood, you ever see the famous black and white clips of rocks being thrown at Nixon in Caracas, Venezuela? Well, Jack Sherwood, that was his driver. As far as Nixon's role in the assassination, that's not really my area. I don't know if this was directly specific, because it doesn't say Vince. I don't know if They know wants to pick up on Nixon or say anything about. Oliver Stone's doing it, that's right.
Read the question.
Read the question.
Okay. I don't have a good photo to show this. I have one, but not here. Someone's asking the question, does Kennedy's hide in the limo rule out a hit in the lower back location as per the face sheet, Boswell's face sheet? Technically, no. But in practical terms, yes. It's theoretically possible that there could have been a low back wound below the normally accepted position. And there's room for a bullet to enter. If you look at the right photographs, you can see exactly where the rear seat cushion lines up with his back, and it's possible that a shot could have hit there. However, there's no hole in the cushion itself. And in order to get a bullet into that location, you'd have to shoot through the cushion, and there's no hole in the cushion. So in practical terms, it's ruled out.
This is for you, I think.
Mr. Bochan?
No,
Commissioned LBJ was one of the wise men. I have it on good sources that John J. McCloy called the, I'm sorry, I can't read, called the hit?
Will the person who has this question stand up and give us your question?
I have it on good sources that John J. McCloy called the hit and was at the pre-assassination party in Dallas. Comment. McCloy was in Dallas, I understand, staying with Clint Murchison.
What's your source for that?
Yes.
What's your source for him being with Murchison? We know of two, but who have you?
The only source I have for that particular fact is the book, The Chairman. Is Clyde Berg's The Book, The Chairman. He mentions that McCloy spent the summer in...
Does he list, the summer?
Yes.
But how about the night before?
Oh, no, I don't know anything about the pre-assassination party, but if there was one, I imagine McCloy might have been invited.
Wait a minute, sir, wait a minute. Tell us about Richard Nixon. What was he doing in Dallas?
I can't tell you about, I mean, I know that he was supposed to be there for...
He was there for directors.
Yeah.
Was it board of directors meeting with Donald Kendall?
That's Congress Convention.
Okay, thank you.
That was the best part at all.
Kathleen?
Go ahead, read your question, please.
LBJ spoke there too.
See, I don't reading glasses. Secretary McNamara's movements on...
When you get to the microphone, please, ma'am.
I can't read this. Yeah, can you read this?
I will
My
try
arms aren't long enough.
I will try to decipher this. Our Secretary McNamara's movements on November 22nd hurried. Did he return from Hawaii? It doesn't seem possible. Is it consistent with his suggested puppet master role that night? So where was McNamara? What was he doing?
McNamara was not with the rest of the cabinet on the way to Hawaii. He is the only one that I am aware of that was here. I only know that very shortly after the assassination, I would say, and I can't remember the exact time, about an hour and a half after the assassination, he went and joined the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and they upgraded the DEFCON situation and put everything on alert. Shortly thereafter, he...
Updated the what?
DEFCON. We went to a higher alert status.
Military alert.
And then he went with Bobby Kennedy to Andrews, and now there the story that I'm familiar with anyway gets funny, because he apparently leaves Bobby Kennedy and comes back to Bethesda driven by his wife in his personal car, and she leaves him at the hospital and goes to pick up her children at some kind of a scout meeting or something, and he goes up to the 17th floor, and that is all I know about McNamara on that evening.
Probably the most detailed discussion of the suite was in Ben Bradley's report. It's the longest discussion I've seen of what was going on in the suite.
On the 17th floor? Martin is telling me that... Martin, why don't you come up here? Martin is going to answer the question. Martin Shackelford?
This is just an additional piece of information. I picked up Ben Bradley's new book recently, and that's got the longest description of who was up in the 17th floor suite and what they were doing.
Well, what was it?
It's 2 pages. I'll refer you to the book.
Spell it out.
Well, I don't.
What did the book say?
Well, it lists all the people. It lists a lot of the people that were up there.
Spit it out.
Well, I didn't memorize it. I just refer people. I'll just refer people to the book.
That's the name of the book.
You all are such experts, and I hesitate to add anything, but you know that McNamara and everybody, they were frightened to death. They were frightened to death at this time because they didn't know what in the world was happening. They didn't know whether it was a conspiracy against the United States overseas. They didn't know whether it was Russia. They didn't know what it was, and they were so frightened. They closed the Mexican border immediately, and I always thought it was very, very funny that the Mexico was their last country to come and send a representative to Kennedy's funeral.
Okay. This one's for me. It says, where can John Reddy and Emory Roberts be reached today? It's like a 3-part thing. First of all, about John Reddy, he was one of a couple agents that I'm pretty sure I reached. Got their answering machine, would never pick up, would never call me back, not that he's obligated to, obviously, who am I, I'm just a stranger, but I do know one little footnote to him is that, I don't know if you know that book, Mortal Error. The authors of Mortal Error contacted him and he refused to discuss the matter of that George Hickey shooting the president theory. Emory Roberts can't be reached. He died in the late 60s, and the interesting thing about Emory Roberts is, I don't like to fuel fire speculation, but this is too good to pass up, I have to admit. Marty Banker, former Secret Service agent, in his book quotes Jim Califitis, the agent who protected Jackie in the early 70s in the Greek Isles, said that an agent took his own life in Washington in the late 60s with a handgun. So obviously, I don't have any confirmation that's Emory Roberts. Makes you think that. What personnel records on them asked for review board to release? I know the JFK Library Secret Service records are sealed. They are not eligible for release. There are oral histories which are real watered down. I got more from Jerry Bain on the phone. I give him this oral history available. Finally, what about the security test cover story to explain Secret Service complicity? Yeah, I tell you what, well, that's exactly, I kind of left it unstated. Kennedy didn't want these things done and he lied about it. I just like that. Because of time constraints, and also I don't want to get into too much of speculation. You need to put two sides of the coin. It's either they were sinisterly involved in covering it up and they wanted him dead, or it was part of the security stripping test that George Michael Utica and I have gone into, that they set him up for whatever reason, and in conspiracy or no conspiracy, someone came in there and he had to cover up after the fact because they left Kennedy a sitting duck.
Vince, can any of the agents comment on the fact that Jackie noticed that she was given red roses in Dallas, all the other women yellow roses, all other cities, everybody got yellow roses?
I didn't know. I never broached that one.
And that's those records that could be released by the board.
They couldn't be released by the board. That would be good if they could.
The autopsy.
Yeah, George Evica is going to say something about the security stripping test.
In March, I was invited to Boston to testify to the Records Review Board. And I spoke on 5 subjects, and I gave a memo on them. But that was the first public airing of the Bill Moyers connection. And the investigative staff did not know about the very important Bill Moyers relationship to the Austin office and the role that he played in the trip to Texas, etc. Now, afterward, I waited for any possible response, and I received a call on the phone on a Saturday morning. I was still in my robe and slippers, and it was the chief investigator for the Records Review Board. And she said, we want to know everything that you know, because I am running the investigation of the Secret Service and the motorcade and the changes, etc., and we want you to help. So I asked her to call back in 45 minutes, spread about 50 pounds of paper on the kitchen table, got a yellow pad out, made about 30 minutes of notes, and she stayed on the phone for an hour and 10 minutes, writing longhand, and I owe her now a rather long memo giving all the names, etc. I also said that if the staff had not so far got to both the book and the person, that they were missing very important information. Somebody named Vince Palamara.
Charlie, wait a minute, come back up here. Tell us, what was the Bill Moyer's participation in?
Much too long to take,
but the
but
fact that he just knew everybody down there and he acted for LBJ on.
apparently Bill Moyers was responsible for getting the motorcade route out. All right? That's the bottom line.
In Austin or where?
Out of Austin. He had a representative in Dallas. Yes, and I gave them that name and her connections to the group that organized the Civic Council. It's a rather complicated, as you well know. I did an outline of a monograph on this subject. What did it take, 2.5 hours in Dallas in the evening? Something like that. It's a monograph called Dallas Doesn't Love You. And it'll be part of, no, I get nothing out of this because I'm never going to finish that book, I don't think. But it is a part of the Iron Sights. But I urge you, if you don't have the thing that is in print, which is Vince Palamara's book, that you run, not walk, to get that. And then know that the Records Review Board is intensely interested in this area. All right? I argued that Connolly and his people managed the whole operation and that he unwittingly, in fact, set up JFK in Dallas and in the motorcade. And the chief investigator is taking that with very straightly to whatever conclusion she finds. Thanks very much.
Wait a minute. Why did you say unwittingly?
Because I think that John Connolly was the second intended victim in Dealey Plaza. I think 2 men were intended to die. John Kennedy and John Connolly.
Why Connolly?
Listen, I'm not a member of the panel, and it would take about a half hour to summarize, all right? But please do take a look at my abstract from is it last year's? No. It is 2 years ago at ASK that I did it, and I think that's available on tape, nearly the entire discussion. And I would urge you, not because, again, I'm going to make anything about it, but it is a very heavily documented piece, which is why the Records Review Board is so interested in it. But do keep an eye out for this kind of thing, and know that with the help of Vince Palamara, we may be getting at where the heart of the ambushing of JFK occurred, in Texas, in Dallas, and in Dealey Plaza. Thanks.
All right, we have one more question. We have pretty well got along pretty well for time. No, we have. We'll let you go, sir.
Yeah, I have a question here from someone who wants to, they quote Dick Sprague's book, Taking of America 1, 2, 3, which says that Harding Bancroft of the New York Times was the liaison with the CIA and led the cover-up. Is he related to Mary Bancroft? And my answer is, I don't know. Mary Bancroft was the daughter of the publisher of the Wall Street Journal, and she's alive and well and living in New York City at the age of 92.
Don know?
Well, he didn't know either. But Mary Bancroft is alive, and I hope to interview her soon. Her nurse that answers the phone in Manhattan says that she will not talk on the phone or answer mail, but if I go up there and interview her personally, she'll talk to me. And the other people in my talk are also alive. Cord Meyer, I just realized from reading the Washington Times yesterday, is a columnist for that paper, and I intend to talk to them and interview them, and all of my research will be made available to everyone.
Oh, wait just a minute, sir. I want to ask you. Mary Meyer, the girl who died on the towpath down here on the canal, taking a walk, was obviously murdered. They did what they usually do. They arrested a black man, but they didn't really push the investigations, push the prior charges against the black man and let him go. Mary Meyer was the sister, was she not, of Mrs. Ben Bradley?
Yes. And,
the first Miss Ben Bradley. And she was, what she knew about Kennedy and what she was doing.
She was married to Cord Meyer, who founded the World Federalist.
Cord Meyer is a columnist, been a columnist in Washington for a long, long time. Very much attached to the CIA, right?
Yes. Lisa Howard, by the way, died around the same time as Mary Meyer. She died of an overdose of barbiturates in a manner very similar to Dorothy Kilgallen.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
Yes, it's all addressed.
All right. I think that's all of our panel now. Thank you very much. I want to tell you how very, very important these people are and how brilliant you all are. And I'm ashamed to be around you because you're so brilliant. You know so much more than reporters do in Washington. And I think this organization is so wonderful in gathering information that the public needs. I didn't understand you.
I have a comment from Bradley's new book.
Well, you're supposed to have your question written out by this.
I don't have a card. I have the answer.
Make it quick.
Upon Tony Bradley's sister's death, she received a phone call from Mary's best friend. And she said, Tony, I'm supposed to collect Mary's diary. Tony did not even realize Mary kept a diary, but she said, I'll go find it. And in the will, it was stated that this diary was supposed to go to the friend. Mary and her husband, Mr. Bradley, went to Tony and her husband went to the apartment to look for the diary. When they got there, who was there to their surprise? Angleton was there in the house. He had broken in. No, he had not found the diary. He left. They left. They could not find the diary. They decided to go back an hour later and look for the diary again, and they did find the diary in a different place. Yes, but that's not the rest of the story. There was a little studio behind Mary's house, and they decided to, when they went back an hour later, to look in the studio. So when they go walking towards the back where the studio was, guess who was there trying to pick the lock to get in? Angleton. It does not, it's very vague in the book. I was very disappointed. He's obviously, he did get, Angleton did end up with the diary. They gave it to him to destroy, which he did not.
Oh.
Well, we don't know what happened to it. We don't know what happened. We don't know if that's real.
The next thing in this room is Claudia Ferriarte, who's come all the way from Brazil to show her film, ZR Rifle, a documentary film about the Cuban investigation of the case. That goes from 7 to 8, and then we go to dinner at 8. Members of the advisory and governing boards are meeting now and should see me on the way out of the room. We have a meeting from 7 to 8, governing and advisory boards. Thank you.